So this is Chaz DeBOLT. She's with the Washington State Department of Health. And what did you want to say?
And I'm here as a private citizen.
Yes.
Awesome. Can I say thank you on behalf of everyone in this room that you even came today?
Yes, thank you.
Do you have any thoughts on homeoprophylaxis? And that's one question. And then I have a second question for like the attorney types. I received a form when I took my child to preschool, and it said, I know I could be causing the death of my child and the other children. And I refused to sign it, and I had to leave. And I'm wondering, is there anything I could do to fight that? I can't afford to hire an attorney, but I want to fight it.
That's a private preschool, right? We don't have public preschools here, so it's a private institution.
Was the first part of your question directed at any individual?
Oh.
I can address
Say a little. I'm not a doctor, but
just plays one on TV.
I work for a holistic veterinary practice, and we do use a lot of homeopathy in treatment. We get questions about no-sodes for dogs all the time. Our vets do not recommend them because the basis of homeopathy is treating disease with these homeopathic medicines. They're not really intended as a prophylactic or a preventive measure. Now, I have heard of naturopaths that use those preparations kind of to fudge titers so that kids can get into school. There's really not a lot of info on if they actually prevent disease, if they work the same way that a vaccine would. They can produce antibodies, and you could have a positive titer, which schools do accept as a substitute. But really, they don't work the same way, and that's not really the basis of homeopathy. So that's the best answer I can give you on that. They could help. We don't really know. I don't think there's been enough study on it.
Can I add to that? So the problem is that homeopaths do not have enough funding and possibilities to actually do any studies about homeoprophylaxis, the way it would be designed for vaccine to test for efficacy and so on and so forth. So that's why we are stuck in this situation where we can't predict ahead of time whether it's working or not. We know that homeopathy works for historical reasons, and those who have personal experiences with homeopathic remedies know, just like people know when there is vaccine injury, people who use homeopathy successfully, they see the difference in the recovery of, speed from various diseases. So it's really an unknown, so you can't say one way or another. Historically, homeoprophylaxis wasn't used as vaccines for long-term prevention. It was only used in the context of the ongoing outbreak. And there are some studies on leptospirosis in Cuba where they did look at it from a public health perspective. They didn't do homeoprophylaxis versus placebo. It wasn't a study. It was just handing out homeoprophylaxis to leptospirosis, affected area, which brought down the epidemic, which would normally happen after a rainy season. So there is a possibility that it works, so it needs to be investigated, but we cannot really apply it right now the way vaccines are intended to.
Can I answer the second question?
Yes.
I'm going to give you half an answer to your second question, and then let's talk offline. When a law is unjust, it must be broken. So if you look at any social movement in history, from 19th century slavery to civil rights, the people who were seeing ahead into the future did not go along with the law. And if you want to know what I mean, we'll talk after.
I can add a slight bit of info on that topic too before.
Let Alan have a turn first.
Yeah, I'm going to respectfully disagree with that. We're a system of laws, and if we decide we're just going to it's not arbitrary, obviously be a good reason, but if we don't follow the laws, if we decide we're not going to follow this law, well then what laws are we going to follow? It's a slippery slope once you start down that path. Now, I would be the first to say there are extreme situations where you don't follow a law for the sake of following a law. If there's going to be some obvious negative effect, then you make a decision, and there's no quick one-size-fits-all kind of thing here. But what I will say, that situation in particular, when the government requires you to agree with them, they're actually violating First Amendment free speech. Free speech, interestingly enough, includes not only the right to voice your own views, within reasonable limits. You're no longer allowed to put the prescription for how to make a dirty nuclear bomb on the internet. But within reasonable limits, you have the right to share your views, but you also have the right to be free from being compelled to speak. When someone says you have to agree, when the government says you have to agree with me, you're being compelled to speak or required to speak. That's a violation of First Amendment free speech. So there's a clear legal violation there that could potentially be pursued. There was a group of parents in a New England state who pursued that and actually got the health department to change the form there without having to file a lawsuit. But potentially you could file a lawsuit as well.
Alan, in this particular case, we're talking about a private institution, not a public school. Does that change anything? Is that access or, sorry?
Yeah,
I stand corrected. I stand corrected. So is there a difference though?
It does come up with private physicians with the vaccine refusal form, and while I would say it's clearly unethical, there's a separate question because we have constitutional rights with governments, not with private entities, but there are exceptions, and there's sometimes where when you're dealing with the vaccines, which is so deeply entrenched in government, to make a long story short, that would create an exception. But it's you have to look at the specific situation as to
Leah, did you have something, Leah? I kind of cut you off.
I just wanted to say something on the note of what's on the exemption form. There is a bill that would remove those incriminating pieces of the form. It got introduced right before the deadline for this session, so it didn't go anywhere. It's still a possibility for the next session. So it's HB 2092. Please talk to your House representatives about it and why it's important to you, because they need our personal stories in order to even consider doing that. So,
can I go one step further with that, or do we need to move on? I'll let you make the call on it.
Did you have something to add on it, Jack?
Yes, thank you. In a number of states, people are modifying the form and then signing it, handing it back. As Mary said earlier, I don't know if you were here present or not, but the solution for you tomorrow that's easy to recommend is that form of your expression is still your expression, as Alan is teaching us. And so if there's something on there that you disagree with, just cross it off, right? Initial the cross off, and then sign it, and then hand it back. That puts them in the position where they're going to have to be the instigator, either in a court of law. If they push it back to you and say, well, I'm not going to accept this, then if you want to sue them, then you can say they refused the form, and then still have the same discussion.
Go ahead, Alan.
If you modify the form, they're going to say we can't accept it. They're going to send it back. I mean, they have the leverage. We're going to respectfully disagree. And so they say you sign the form, or you can't come to school here, and they're the one in the position to say that. Or I will not treat your child in my practice if you don't sign the form. In the respective situations. I would not want to sign something that I didn't agree with. But so far, this might be a naive thing to say, but so far I've never heard of anybody, a situation where somebody had one of those forms where somebody tried to use it against them. You said you were a bad parent, therefore, this consequence. I think it's there for the simple purpose of trying to coerce you into vaccinating right now, and if you really dig in your heels and you say, I'm not going to do this, then okay, your kid doesn't go to school here, or you don't get to come to this practice, so you're left holding the bag. You can try modifying it, and if they accept it, great. I say do it in the smallest way possible, right above your signature right. I do not agree with all of the above. The least way that you can write it, I think, has the best chance of them accepting it. But if they say no, you keep that one as the evidence that you tried to disagree. You sign another one the way they want it and get on with your life. Now, you can also challenge it legally if it's a public school with a form, because it's unconstitutional, in my opinion. You find an attorney, and you could potentially get the health department to change the form again, potentially without a lawsuit at all. But if you wanted to, or you had to, you could take it to court and see what happens with it. But I work with hundreds and hundreds of people over the years, and I rarely have somebody who has the emotional stamina, the money, and says, yeah, let's go to court. I want to fight this. We all want to fight it, but who actually wants to hire an attorney and walk through the steps? So.
I'd like to inject that you're part of a community as well, and there is resources online for you to do GoFundMes. And I've seen people be intimidated by lawyers, nothing against lawyers, but their own lawyer, No, their own lawyer who said, you're going to offend the judge if you go to the community with this to raise money. And I said, go to the community and raise money. I know examples of where a doctor systematically has a conversation with the patients, and they say, just cross out what you don't like and sign it. I'll accept it. So it can work. It depends on the practice. And if the most valuable thing that you might have in this situation are your feet, and go find another practice.
Okay, let's move on. Oh, we have one more comment. Can I have a comment from one of our
people? Me. Right. Okay. So yeah, because I know you're not from Washington State, Alan. So many of us do homeschooling, and as you know, the people who work at the schools will ask you to do more than what you are legally required to do by the state law. Now, so what we do is we get educated as homeschoolers. For example, we go to the school, we say, here, I'm going to give you the information you need. They give you a form asking for 5 other pieces of information. And if you say to the person who works there and they're ignorant enough, no, I only need to tell you these 2 things, they might argue with you. But if you then get the support of WHO and you get the legislation, you come back and say, legally I'm only obligated to do this, they will give in. Now, I'm pretty certain that this form that's being floated around the schools that comes from Department of Health, I think it is actually an expansion beyond what the law actually states we're required to do, and that the Department of Health pushed it a little bit, and they're just waiting for people to be ignorant enough to give them what they want. So what I would do is check with Department of Health, confirm whether their form lines up with the actual letter of the law. I don't think it does. And if you can do that and go back to the school, they've lost their argument. But someone has to do that check on whether this new form lines up with what the actual letter of the law is. And if it doesn't quite, then that's your option.
And
I got you, don't worry.
sorry, that was a delay. You can go right into, like right now, tomorrow, whenever, you can go and read the wording of the law as it is. You can just look up current Washington State, Google Washington State immunization laws. I don't believe that they took away your right to have your doctor use a letter. On the 2011 exemption form, which is still available, and you could also try to use that one, that does not have the incriminating language on it. It just says, my doctor has told me about the risks and the benefits, and that's it. But on that form, it also stated your doctor can use a letter instead of this. The new form doesn't say anything, but I don't think there's anything in the wording of the law that took away your right to also just have your doctor use a letter. So there are other ways around it. You could ask me to show you the form afterwards, the older form. They may just use that. There are other options. I mean, it's good to push it, I think, if you can, but,
Okay, very excellent. This is a great discussion. Let's move on to our next.
This is actually a great segue. In my experience, something interfering with a lot of the legal and especially the scientific and political discussions are the social aspects, the language we use, the sociology around vaccines. And I'd be really interested to just go down the line and each of you speak briefly about what you would like to see change about the way we speak about vaccines across the board, across many different perspectives.
Well, I think the way the other side speaks is either directly or indirectly from a tactic of how to manipulate or control to achieve their end. And so in order to get to a place where we can truly have an objective, open discussion about it, we have to clear out whatever part is there with an agenda other than having that actual conversation. So I think we need to be exploring and looking more at what are the systems of control that are in place trying to prevent the conversation that all of us want to have. I'm not sure just continuing to assert our view and hoping at some point that somebody will finally say, okay, let's have a conversation. There are lots of, there are many different levels and types of people on this on both sides of it. So I'm kind of oversimplifying it here. There are good people who disagree with us, I would say because they have bad information, but there are also very deliberate mechanisms employed. When you don't have the truth on your side, you have to use something else to control the discussion. And so we are where we are because the discussion has been controlled. So we need to identify those mechanisms of control and address those in order to clear a space for there to be an open conversation. So that's what I'd like to see us as a community and a society, larger society, focusing on.
There was a meme that was going on Facebook, which really applies here. So there is one side yelling at the parent, "You are stupid, vaccines are safe." The other side is yelling at the parent, "You are stupid, vaccines are dangerous." So what I would like to see changed is that a parent is treated as an intelligent adult. And so neither side determines that the truth is on our side. We already did research, just accept on faith what we did or what we researched. We really need just to present information to parents and let them decide which risks they want to take or don't want to take and how they perceive diseases, and really just answer their questions to the extent possible and go from there. And it's really comes down to vaccine choice on either end.
That was a perfect answer. Yeah, I mean, part of changing the language around this conversation is that last slide that Tatiana showed, where it's not about putting vaccines in the middle, it's about putting the immune system, and maybe I'd like to put the child there too. And so if we all remember that we have the same goal, which is to have the healthiest, happiest, smartest children, we're trying to keep our kids safe from infectious disease and also keep their brains and their bodies intact, then we can completely change the conversation and we can fix this.
So at the start of the vaccine epidemic book, it talks about the sort of pro versus anti and how that's totally unhelpful. It's such a much more complicated question. And for me, I focus on prior free and informed consent and the human right to choice. That's how I try to deal with the language.
And you do it very well, by the way. So I can refer you to JamesLyons-WEILER.com. I've written an article on this topic. It's time to change the course of the tone of and the course and dialogue of over vaccines and informed consent. And then I'd also like to see, well, respect is huge. I mean, that's part of it. I'd like to see Congress be told by the American public to fund earmark money for $1 billion to do neurodevelopment research. We don't need research on vaccines. That's for pharmaceutical companies to do. I'd like to see the pharmaceutical companies broken up like we did with Ma Bell and have competition between smaller and drive innovation with a free and open market. I'm hoping that this would be an opportunity for our government to do that with the MMR alleged fraud. So the $1 billion that I'm speaking about, we have 7 research program initiatives. The consortium is called the Neurodevelopment Research Reform Initiative. And the very first program, the first priority program is how do we treat these kids that are vaccine injured without saying they're vaccine injured? How do you handle all this neurodevelopment disorder in our society from a medical standpoint? What are the most optimal ways of treating them? How do you integrate that into education? And a major source of the inspiration for our hypothesis should come from the observational data from the population, the moms and the dads of the United States, testing cannabis oil and testing other methods and testing what happens if are there safe ways to get metals out of tissue and all of it. Let's do science. It's so obvious to me that we have a very sick subpopulation and they're not being completely underserved. The final thing I'd like to say is because artificial immunization is not going to go away. It's just not going to. So what I'd like to do is set up robust research to develop safety screens. And all of this presumes that we can do a natural, normal, objective conversation with each other, which just points right back to respect.
I don't know how to follow that, but I mean, it would kind of go along with what Tetiana and Jennifer said, and I just really wish there was less disdain from both sides of the issue. It seems like social media has just ramped up this war of hatred and people saying, I hope your kids die then. Or, you know, even coming from our side with, you know, accusing someone of making the wrong comment that they're a troll. And it can get so bad so quickly in online conversation. And I just wish that publicly there would be more discussion of really how vaccines work and some of the limitations, like how it's sort of assumed that if you're vaccinated, you can't get sick and you can't spread disease. You're good. And that's just not necessarily the case for everyone. People respond differently. And yeah, so.
So does everyone know what the Cutter incident was?
Yes.
Oh.
Oh, good. Talk about it.
So in 1954, Cutter Labs made a polio vaccine that was supposed to be an inactivated vaccine, and it wasn't adequately inactivated. And so when they were doing the vaccine trials, I mean, they weren't trials, but they were rolling it out, and they rolled it out, I know for sure in Idaho, because that's where I lived. And I got that vaccine, and I'm a Cutter kid. And you know, I'm fine, but when I get really tired, I still can feel the effects of having received that vaccine in terms of just being nervous, nerve jumpy. You know, I don't do well when I'm exhausted. And my mom told me that it was the scariest part of her motherhood. But nevertheless, I grew up and went to nursing school and had first career as an intensive care nurse. And then I met some friends from Africa who were here as AIDS scholars. And I met them because I love to dance, and they told me that I should go into epidemiology. And I had to handwrite my application because I was computer illiterate, but for whatever reason, the University of Washington let me in. And I graduated in epidemiology, and totally by fluke, they needed somebody at the local health department in the middle of the Jack-in-the-Box outbreak. And that wasn't what I was going to do with epidemiology, because I'm an anthro undergrad, and I was going to do sociocultural epidemiology studies. But I fell in love with infectious disease. And and
who wouldn't? You know, I mean.
And I've been doing it ever since. And the immunization coordinator at the health department where I was working was also doing the disease surveillance. And so I started doing that part of her job. So what I've done over the last almost 25 years is it's my job to know about the diseases for which a vaccine has been developed. It's my job to know how the disease presents. And so I'm a surveillance epi for vaccine preventable diseases. And every phone call I get is an adventure. I want to talk to whoever is on the phone. I want to answer their questions. I want to make sure they have the resources that's needed. And I want all of you to realize that there are thousands of people like me across the country who really want to be a good public servant and who really want people to have whatever they need, whatever's causing their discomfort about the situation they're in. We want those resources to get out there. And what I would really love is if people could just do a check when you're saying our side and their side. And what does that even mean?
Great, thank you very much. I'm coming your way. We've got a question here.
Hi. First, I want to say the two answers about the homeopathic no-sodes. I'm a naturopathic physician, and when you asked the question, I kind of braced myself, and your answers were awesome and made my day. Thank you so much. But today I heard a lot of kind of vilifying generalizations about doctors and how we approach vaccines and how we approach talking to our patients about it. And I totally understand those generalizations because that's what a lot of people experience when they go to their pediatricians. I was wondering if you knew, or honestly anybody here, of a way that physicians who are more like-minded to what we're talking about here, a way that we can become more visible. Is there an organization we can join that has our name somewhere? It's a little bit, I feel, dangerous to kind of blatantly advertise that you're okay with not vaccinating because you'll get trolled, somebody might report you. But if there's any other way.
Informed consent.
Well, I went to that website right away, and it says that if you register and join, your name's not going to be shared with anybody. So,
Well, if you indicate your intention to be shared, you can become advisor, and then your name will appear there.
Okay.
If you don't want to be anonymous.
well, perfect. Thank you.
There's another way to do that. There are, I think, 3 different sites that host online lists of vaccine-friendly doctors. So make sure that you and everyone you know who falls in that category. So a vaccine-friendly doctor is someone who maybe gives vaccines, but is friendly to families who want to individualize or customize the schedule. So one is Dr. Bob Sears's, the other is Naturally Nicole's. And then the third one is, I think that Dr. Paul Thomas is also hosting a site.
Here's our next question. I just want to say thank you, first of all. I've really resonated with many things that you guys have said, especially you, a fellow nurse. I'm also a nurse, and I've seen both sides. I've also had a vaccine reaction myself, and luckily it's documented, and it gets me an exemption from getting the flu vaccine every single year in my job, which I get a form to sign that has statements that say, you're making your patients susceptible, other people susceptible, and I always end up saying I'm signing this under duress, or some statement as you've said. I haven't had to sign one in a long time. There's one particular hospital that had to sign those. But anyhow, I had a question about pertussis, and I'm sorry I was in and out earlier. I had my baby here, but my husband took him home. I don't know if I missed it. I remember reading that the pertussis vaccine is causing people who've been vaccinated to be more susceptible to getting pertussis, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with that study or can speak to that.
Yeah. So the study that came out of CDC, they were looking at 2 different strains of pertussis and how they're distributed between patients or pertussis cases that have been vaccinated versus not. And the strain, which is pertactin negative, that's what it is called now, seems to be seems to be more concentrated in patients who were vaccinated. And if they're up to date, the more they're up to date, the higher their chance of being positive for pertactin negative strain. So they also did experiments in mice in Australia where they took those 2 strains and they had mice that were vaccinated versus not. And again, they showed something similar in that the pertactin negative strain had selective advantage in the mice or animals that were primed with a cellular pertussis vaccine. So there is some kind of strain selection that is going on, and vaccinated people are no longer really protected from it. And so there was even an outbreak of pertussis in a Florida preschool, and again, this is a CDC study, where the only 3 kids who were vaccine exempt for pertussis, those 3 kids, they didn't get pertussis, whereas out of the maybe 100 students, 30 students or so, fully vaccinated, got pertussis. They didn't check which strain was it, but very likely it's this new strain.
I'd like to add something to that. So I go to resale shops with Gracie, and we buy old medical textbooks. And one medical textbook I opened up, it had a little proof of immunization card. You'll remember these things. And it said that I, the attending physician, recognize a little pustulous bump on the arm, and therefore I believe this person is immunized. At that point in time, that they could clarify the difference between vaccination and immunization. Many states have it on the law that if you're going to immunize a person, you have to prove that they're immunized. And they can do that with titer testing. The titer testing is a double-edged sword. And so it's possible that the people who were vaccinated one time with pertussis became immune to pertussis. But they became sensitized to pertussis through the autoimmune theory of pathology from infectious diseases. In other words, the antibodies that they developed then reacted more strongly on the second dose. And yet, and that makes logical sense from an immunological standpoint. But then if we have children, the double-edged sword comes because if we have children who have compromised immune systems and we don't really know it, and we vaccinate them and you test for titers, I've heard stories of families that have gone through 20 boosters to try to get the titers to work. And with all the adjuvants and excipients and so on, it just becomes something that's really not well thought out. That's the best thing that I can say.
Well, I brought that up too because I was told that, a while ago that I needed a pertussis. I think it was years ago when Washington had an outbreak and they wanted a pertussis, and they don't just give pertussis; you have to get the Tdap.
Yes.
So you have to get all of them. And I called the CDC, asked them, "Can you just do a titer on me? I've had the pertussis." And no, they said you can, but we're not going to accept your results.
It's really I don't see why they have a choice to accept or not accept results of titers, which is universally accepted as evidence of immunity. What was their basis of that?
Right. And so they just said they don't recognize titers. That's the only way to follow the rules. And
Did you get it in writing?
Right. That's the thing is when you call the CDC, you don't know. I mean, you're just talking to one of their representatives, and they're giving what they know is to be the information. So I was just curious about more information about the things on pertussis.
I think you got that answer because you were asking about pertussis. In vaccinology, there's a concept called correlative immunity. And so for pertussis, there is not a good correlative immunity. So there isn't a blood test that you can do and say this person's immune.
Then how do they develop a schedule?
Great question.
I'm probably not even going to go there.
But that's what baffles me is you give me, I need to follow this rule, but then it can't get tested for it. How did you get it scheduled, and how did you determine it needs to give a hint, this, and you can't test for it, and it's not you, but
So
editorial
just let me add though that if you had been asking about measles, they would have told you yes, all you need is to have an IgG positive for measles on file. And as Tatiana said, that's actually doesn't necessarily mean you're protected, but that is what is considered routine evidence of immunity. But with pertussis, we just don't have that.
Okay, we have some late breaking news. You have an answer too?
Just a short one.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that pertussis is a difficult question. And it's really important to remember that children do die in the United States of pertussis infections. And the most vulnerable children are those who are newborns to age about 3 months. That's the reason why we're vaccinating pregnant women, because we have this idea that maybe if we vaccinate them, we want to help those most vulnerable children. And then, so that is a reality that is a little bit of a scary thing that parents really need to be aware of, and it doesn't serve any of us to undermine, to pretend that doesn't exist. It really does. And then at the same time, we have an imperfect vaccine. I interviewed the head of the county health the CDC came to our small town, and I interviewed 2 of them, and they said, listen, let's be really honest. This vaccine is really not working that well. So we have a situation where we have a vaccine that's not working that well, and we have a disease that we need to pay attention to and take seriously, especially in our youngest. Once a child is older, we don't have to be as worried about it, and they often have pertussis without even knowing it. So that's not an answer. That's just putting it out there that it's a complicated issue, that we need a better, more effective vaccine, and we need to have lots of good ways to boost immunity for our babies too.
Nice to know if I had pertussis at some point, had core immunity, and could pass it along to my baby through my breast milk, but there's no test for that, so it's just get another shot, get another shot.
I suppose they could test for antibodies in the breast milk.
Okay, let's move on. I have tons of people with their hands up, and we only got a couple minutes. Late breaking news: March Twisdale down at the end there. See that with her waving her hand. She looked up the law regarding the exemption forms, and it is in fact the current law is that a doctor can write a letter in lieu of the exemption form that the school gives you.
Right. Instead of signing the form, providers, that's your doctor, may write and sign a letter that contains the child's name and verification that they discussed immunization benefits and risks with the parent. That's in the DOH rules, basically. So the person at the school doesn't know the law, take the law to the school administrator, and you're good.
All right, let's try just bang out a few rapid fire questions here.
Okay, first, thank you for everything you do. And then my question comes from the constantly growing CDC schedule. Is there, since especially now the HPV vaccine is recommended for infants and school children, I was wondering if I think they were starting to recommend it for infants. No, that's been on the internet. Okay. So that's a relief then. Well, I was wondering, with 10 years or 50 years down the line in mind, is there a way to put a legal cap on how many immunizations can be on the schedule instead of depending on good faith that it won't exceed reasonable, not that it hasn't already, but like it won't exceed,
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we talked about the 86 law gave liability protection, and we've seen the schedule go from 7 vaccines to now plus 16 and 300 in the pipeline. And the way that they get on the schedule is there's this advisory committee on immunization practices that recommends them from the CDC, and then the states pick them up. This is really being driven by manufacturers. And there's enormous conflicts of interest among the people sitting on that ACIP committee. And then there's enormous conflicts of interest in the legislatures, where the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry are, funding campaigns. Is there any way to cap it? That's an interesting question. That might be one legal strategy, but I think the best way is informed consent. You have a right to say no. Every doctor, in theory, will agree with you that you have a right to say yes and no to all medicines, and then they have this carve out for vaccines. Our job is to get everybody on board that you can't have a carve out for vaccines. A vaccine is just like a prescription drug. It's unavoidably unsafe. It's not safe for everybody. The statutes say it. We know that. So our job is to make everybody understand vaccine is a medicine, and there has to be prior free and informed consent.
Okay, we're gonna go one answer per question so we can try and get through these questions.
Hi, Dr. Stephen Saunders. I'm a chiropractor practicing in Kirkland. I have a question about information that comes from Dr. Stephanie Seifertz from MIT. She Senef, sorry. She says that there's glyphosate in vaccines. Does anybody on the panel know that that's true or not? And then the other question is, if there is glyphosate in vaccines, has it been proven to replace glycine in human proteins?
I'll take the second question. The second question is, Dr. Senef and I have discussed the importance of testing the hypothesis that she's proposed. And it's relatively straightforward to test. So you can grow yogurt, you can grow yeast, you can grow life and culture that's glycine poor, but glyphosate rich, and see if then the proteins that she suspects might contain glyphosate instead of glycine, do they take it up? We haven't found a food scientist yet to work with, but if anyone knows a food scientist is willing to do that, she would like to work with them. And I would refer you to Dr. Senef's publications to answer. I don't want to guesstimate. I haven't looked at the yes/no on vaccines, whether the glyphosate is there or not. Tammy, you have an idea on that?
Hi, I just talked to Anthony Samsell on Friday because I was actually going to be hiring him to do some work for the NTP community. He's got a paper coming out, and it went through peer review, and somehow or another it got hung up. I wonder why, because it's all about glyphosate and collagen in your joints, in your vaccines, and in your gelatin.
It always comes down to Jell-O.
I'll just
Hold
say
on a
really,
second.
I'll just say really quickly
I'm coming.
that
Take
it
it, 3
was
more.
confirmed glyphosate contamination in vaccines. I've seen the lab report. It was Moms Across America that sent samples to an independent lab, and they were very surprised that pretty much every sample had some level of glyphosate, mostly from animal products like gelatin being ingredients in vaccines.
Okay, we're going over by to 5:05 because I'm taking 3 last questions here.
I don't know if this is going to be completely off topic, or this might go down a rabbit hole that we don't have to go down, but so we live in a free country. We have the right to choose which type of medical paradigm to use. However, it seems as though vaccines fit under Western medicine, that paradigm, correct? So why is it that is being forced on the whole entire population? And where are our, human rights to where, many people don't practice Western medicine? It doesn't work for everybody. And yet it's
money.
That's the top layer.
But can I just one sentence on that? We are not being forced. The CDC does not mandate any vaccines. The CDC makes recommendations, and then the states quote unquote mandate, but they do not mandate. You always have the right to say no. So even in California, you have the right to say no. And you also have the right to walk with we're consumers. We consume everything. I say to everyone in this room, not only you do it, but find 5 other people and walk away from any doctor or any healthcare provider who wants you to force you to do anything. That absolutely, we are empowered. We are consumers. Unfortunately, we have a for-profit medical system that wants to shove a lot of stuff down our throats that is not actually good for us or for our children. But let's not pretend that, let's not get despairing about who is powerful. The people in America are powerful. We have the freedom of speech, we have freedom of the press, and we have the ability to make good decisions, even though that doesn't always feel that we do.
We always talk about they won't do the study unvaxxed versus vaxxed, but just like you were talking about earlier with the Tylenol, the retrospective information that's available, how come we haven't yet, and who would need to do that? Because it seems like we're waiting around for the CDC to do this study, and they won't do it, but can't we just, as a group of informed scientists, gather up that data and publish it? Why isn't that occurring, and what's it gonna take to get it to occur?
Is that the same money answer?
Okay, so this time next year, there should be vaxxed versus unvaxxed published. That's all I'm going to say about that, and things should go well. The answer to the question why it's not done is obvious. If you do a vaccinated versus unvaccinated with an actual saline placebo, you're going to see worse health outcomes. That's evident in looking at some studies from Europe. I would recommend the book Jabbed by Brent Wilcox. He reviews all of that there. It's not the CDC that's doing the vaccinated versus unvaccinated study, because it's the responsibility of the manufacturers to report to the FDA the safety and efficacy of the product. The CDC came into this to quell the question, do vaccines cause autism? They didn't come into this and say, hey, let's study autism and see what they're like. It wasn't an undirected discovery. It was to shut down discussion and fear over vaccines, because Dr. Andy Wakefield had a hypothesis that perhaps vaccines are associated with autism. Right from the get-go, by setting out to do a demonstration that vaccines don't cause autism, they weren't doing science. Science is not a demonstration. Science is an exploration. And so I give you kudos for calling for science. Oh, thank you. I'll say that again one more time for the cameras. But the point is, we are powerful people with a voice. You sit in a state, at the state level. You could pass laws that require your doctor to sign a piece of paper saying, I know that I'm putting your child at risk by vaccinating. You could do that. You could require that any vaccine that's used in the state of Washington is backed by a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. The power lies with the people talking to the legislatures and using your power of vote to say you voted the wrong way in the legislation we want. Because vaccination uptake and vaccination applications are done at the state level. Okay.
Excellent. We're going to take this last question and then we're going to dismiss.
Hi. Okay. Dr. Lyons-WEILER, you said earlier increased copy number variations with 20% of AD kids. Do you mean mutations?
They're a form of mutation, but copy number variation exists both in variation that you can inherit from mom to dad, yeah, that'll work. From parent to child, jet lag's a wonderful thing. From parent to child, and then the type that I was talking about were de novo copy number variations that happen in a sperm or the egg. So they're new to that child. In that form, they can be considered a mutation without any social connotations.
Thank you. The microglia you were talking about, helping the brain make connections, my understanding of kids on the spectrum were that they had incredible increase in number of microglial cells. So how do you explain that? The lack of the many-to-many connections that you were talking about, that the neurons in the brain are so great at doing if they have the proper stimulation. Are too many microglial cells inhibiting that?
Gliosis is a very serious condition, and the microglia destroy dendrites and neural precursor cells. And in the book that on causes, I cite the specific studies that show that those statements that I'm making are backed by science. And so if you have, it's the activated form of the microglia more so than too many. It's too many activated, okay? The activated microglia. And the condition is chronic microglial activation. And there's a list of, I didn't say this earlier, but there's a list of compounds in the book that are known to shut down microglia that are activated. They include chamomile tea, because it has luteolin, and a variety of fruits. Prefer the organic because you don't want the glyphosate and other pesticides to reactivate your microglia. So take it easy, do the research, talk to your doctor before you change anything. I'm not a medical doctor. Do not look at my book as a prescription for what to do medically, but to educate yourself about what options exist.
Okay, Vic, listen, it's been a long day, and a lot has been said. There's a lot to think about. And you all should be congratulated for coming here and having an open discussion. Through dialogue comes change. And that's what we had here. So please give a round of applause to our panelists.